The summer of 2010 was a strange and deadly one for many parts of the world, but nowhere felt the heat more painfully than Russia. What started out as an unusually warm spring quickly spiraled into one of the most intense and deadly heat waves ever recorded in modern times. By the time it ended, more than 55,000 people had lost their lives. Over 9 million hectares of farmland were scorched, and parts of the country were burning in record-breaking wildfires. But this disaster wasn't just bad luck, it was the result of a series of events that had been building up for months. It all began with a global weather pattern shift known as El Niño. From June of 2009 to May of 2010, a moderate El Niño warmed up the ocean currents and started changing weather all across the northern hemisphere. That's what kicked off the first wave of unusual heat in places like the United States, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, China, North Africa, and large parts of Europe and Russia. But that was only the beginning. Right after that, another global weather event took over. This time it was La Niña, and it was much stronger. Starting in June of 2010 and lasting through the next summer, this La Niña event was one of the strongest ever recorded, and it hit hard. Powerful anticyclones, basically large high-pressure systems, started building up across the northern hemisphere. In Russia, one of the biggest anticyclones parked itself right over Siberia. It didn't move for months. That created a kind of atmospheric traffic jam. The hot air just sat there, baking everything underneath it. By June, the temperatures were already rising fast. Across the eastern United States, the Middle East, northeastern China, and especially in European Russia, the heat became unbearable. Global weather stations reported that June was the fourth warmest month ever recorded. In the northern hemisphere, April to June was the warmest stretch ever documented on land, more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit above average. But it wasn't just the temperature that made things bad, it was how long it lasted. Normally heat waves come and go, but this one just stayed day after day, week after week. It didn't rain. The wind didn't blow. The air didn't move. By the end of June, the soil was already drying out. Farmers started noticing their crops were wilting, and then the fires started. The heat wave officially kicked off in Moscow on June 27th. The temperature hit 91 degrees Fahrenheit, way above what anyone was used to there, and it stayed high for days. Throughout the rest of that week, the thermometer didn't drop below 90. Other parts of the country started heating up too. In Yakutia, deep in Siberia, the temperature hit over 95 degrees, which was extremely rare. The roads were so hot, city workers in Moscow had to spray them down with water just to stop the pavement from melting. By the end of June, over 1,200 people had already drowned in Russia. Many of them were just trying to cool off in lakes, rivers, or canals, but the heat made people careless. Emergency officials said that many of the drowning victims had been drinking or swimming in unsafe spots. Still, nobody thought things would get as bad as they did. At that point, it was just hot, dangerously hot, but it wasn't yet a full-blown disaster. That would come soon. As the heat wave tightened its grip across Russia in the summer of that year, records began to fall one after another. Cities that usually saw mild, comfortable summers were suddenly dealing with temperatures well above normal. In Moscow, the thermometer climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, an extreme number for a place that typically stays far cooler during that season. Across central and western Russia, asphalt buckled, rivers dropped to alarmingly low levels, and power grids came under intense strain. The intense demand for air conditioning and cooling systems pushed energy use to all-time highs. In many areas, the electrical infrastructure simply couldn't handle it. Blackouts rolled through towns and cities, leaving thousands without power during the hottest days of the year. In rural areas, the situation was even worse. Many small villages lacked modern cooling systems altogether. Elderly residents and young children were the most vulnerable. With no relief from the brutal heat, the number of heat-related deaths began to climb rapidly. Hospitals struggled to manage the growing number of patients suffering from dehydration, heat exhaustion, and related complications. Even at night, temperatures refused to drop, giving people no break from the intense heat. Sleeping became difficult, tempers flared. The emotional and physical stress took a toll on the population. For many, it wasn't just the temperature, it was the feeling that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just an unusually hot summer, it was a crisis unfolding in real time. As the heat wave continued into the heart of summer, Russia began to face a growing national crisis. Temperatures stayed dangerously high for weeks. Crops withered in the fields, Hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland dried up, leading to widespread crop failure. Wheat, one of Russia's main exports, was hit especially hard. The government was forced to ban grain exports by early August of that year to protect its own food supply. That decision had ripple effects far beyond Russia's borders. Countries that depended on Russian wheat suddenly faced shortages, and global food prices began to rise. Within Russia, food prices also spiked, adding more pressure to families already struggling with the heat. In some parts of the country, shelves in local markets emptied quickly and panic buying set in. Fires burned through forests and peat bogs around Moscow and other central regions, releasing thick clouds of smoke. These fires weren't just destructive, they made the already unbearable air even more dangerous. The smoke settled over the capital, making it hard to breathe. Visibility dropped, people were told to stay inside. Hospitals filled up with patients suffering from heat stroke, breathing problems, and other heat-related illnesses. By this point, the situation had overwhelmed local authorities. Emergency services were stretched thin, entire towns were surrounded by flames. Volunteers and even local villagers worked alongside firefighters too. As the Russian heat wave dragged on, the environmental impact grew more severe. Forests, grasslands, and farmlands suffered from extreme drought. In many regions, crops failed entirely. Wheat fields that once stretched green across the landscape turned to dry, cracked dust. Russia, one of the world's largest grain exporters at the time, was forced to ban exports completely due to the poor harvest. This led to price spikes in global food markets, with ripple effects felt far beyond the country's borders. Air quality became a major concern. Thick smoke from widespread wildfires filled the skies, especially around major cities. The combination of extreme heat, stagnant air, and smoke created a choking haze. In some areas, visibility dropped to just a few hundred feet. Breathing became difficult, especially for those with asthma or other health conditions. The environmental damage didn't end with fire and drought. Wildlife also faced harsh conditions. Rivers and lakes dried up or became too warm to sustain fish populations. Insects and animals that usually thrived in cooler conditions struggled to survive. Entire ecosystems shifted in response to the intense and sudden heat, leaving scientists concerned about long-term effects. The Russian heat wave became a wake-up call for many around the world. Scientists and climate experts pointed to the event as a clear example of how global temperatures were changing. While no single weather event could be blamed entirely on climate change, the severity and duration of this heat wave fit into a growing pattern. For Russia and for the rest of the world, it marked a moment where extreme weather could no longer be ignored.